Next up is Paige Frewer. Paige is going to be talking about drag culture and is the producer of Man Up here in Vancouver. I am a huge fan of drag. Now I have to admit, it's RuPaul's Drag Race, but I'm obsessed. To the point that my class often will laugh because I will be leaving and I'll be like, yes! Like, you need real English. So, a big round of applause for Paige Frewer.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me at Nerd Night. I'm super nervous usually when I'm talking in front of a crowd. They're like, I can't see any of their faces and they're all really drunk and falling all over each other and hooting and hollering for the next performer, and it's over in like a minute and a half. And today I have to talk for longer than that, but you guys are a very warm and welcoming audience, so thank you again for having me. Dorky, like nerdy, not in a good way, just in like a forgetful way. This is like my placeholder title, the highlight of my PowerPoint, obviously. So my name is Paige. When I'm in drag, I'm also known as Ponyboy. I've been producing a show called Man Up here in Vancouver and performing as a drag performer since about the time that Man Up began. In my regular life, I identify as genderqueer or non-binary or trans. These are sort of like all imperfect words that collectively, you know, help to explain how I feel about what my gender is on the inside, and hopefully I will be able to help illuminate a little bit about what sort of gender means for people and people in the queer community in this conversation we're going to have. As a drag performer, I describe myself as a glam king or a femme king, and the term that most people are familiar with is drag king, and some people aren't familiar with drag king and they've only ever heard of drag queens, so we'll learn a little bit about that today too. I'm going to talk a little bit about, again, what's gender, what is gender performance, and what does gender mean in the context of stage, queer space, entertainment spaces. How has drag and gender performance changed, at least over the course of the last decade or so that I've been involved in the community. And if we have time and I don't spend too much on the intro part, which is just like my personal story talking about myself, we'll talk about why drag spaces are so important for queer communities. So, let's see if this works. Hey, okay, this is part of my drag family. This is part of the Man Up crew a few months ago. It's not everybody, but it's sort of a little bit of a snapshot of some of the amazing personalities that we have on stage with us every month. Okay, so this is just a little bit of like, you know, my personal story and how I came to become, you know, and do what I'm doing right now. So as a young person, I gravitated towards like traditionally like masculine sort of behaviors and interests, and you know, felt very drawn towards the things that, you know, I didn't get to do, but the boys got to do, which is like, you know, a common like story for many folks and many women and young girls. So I played a lot of sports and like really was into like guns, which is sort of disturbing, but it's like the thing that like little boys did, and so I like also wanted to do it. Yeah, so as I got a little bit older and sort of encountered maybe some like social difficulties and socializing that was like steering me away from, you know, expressing myself in like masculine little person ways, I sort of embraced like, or veered into the direction of just like, you know, normal like little girl things. And this sort of happened in my teens, and I, you know, did this to kind of like get attention from boys and be able to make female friends better. And this was my idea of like what femininity was. And looking back now, it's like this was drag, because I didn't even know like what I was doing, or like what like fashion or like femininity meant. These are a couple mild examples, but yeah, in my later teens, so like maybe around the turn of you know, 2000, and the L word came out, and I discovered the L word, and my brother-in-law at the time would, because I wasn't, out yet, and I didn't really know, but I was really into the show, but it was this like big hush-hush secret, and he would film L word episodes on VHS for me, and label them with like a nature show or something like that, and just like really casually drop them off at like family dinners, and I would like watch them secretly in my bedroom in Ladner, and like it was just this crazy sort of new world that was like the beginning of thinking about myself in this way as like potentially like a queer person. And then see what's next. Oh yeah, so then I like moved out from Ladner, and I started to, was dating my first girlfriend and came into the sort of Vancouver queer scene, got a job at Lick, which is like tragically like not around anymore, but it was Vancouver's only and last lesbian and queer venue in Vancouver, and it was just this like brilliant new sort of like eye-opening experience of like LGBT like culture, so the kind of the story of how Man Up started basically is I was bartending at this club, and it was pretty community sort of oriented, and the bar manager at the time was like really friendly with all the staff, and if there was ever an open date, whether or not you had any experience producing events or performing or whatever, you could kind of just like pitch a party idea and like do it, and you get the room. So I wanted to have a birthday party for myself, and I was turning 22, and I didn't really know anything about drag. I had seen like one drag king show, but I was like, some sort of entertainment would be cool, and she connected me with this performer in the scene called Sammy Tomato, and they sort of partnered with me to like book the show and like guide me in this process of like putting on this party that was like a fundraiser event. So long story short, Sammy Tomato dared me to perform at my party, and for whatever reason, I had like a dozen or so serving jobs at the time and was like in school, so I just invited absolutely everybody I knew, and like most of them came, and it was just a packed bar, and that was sort of my introduction to performing drag. And the picture on the left is, it took me so long to find this picture, but this is like pre-smartphones, like 2008 or something. This was the birthday party, like surprise performance. So anyhow, so the end of that story is that Sammy Tomato kind of like, saw potential in me, and a month later was like, hey, I have experience producing shows and performing, and I think that you might be into doing this too, and apparently you know how to like get your friends to actually come to the place where you are, and that would make for a good promoter, so like, do you want to do this party called Man Up with me? And so that's kind of how Man Up started, and it was only maybe a couple months after my birthday party that we started Man Up. So in the, so I'll come back to Man Up a little bit, but I wanted to just give a little bit of like that's the very first Man Up, which happened like 2 months later. The posters on the left that Sammy designed, and then Sammy and myself and our other co-producer, founder person, Magic, is at the top right. And the event was all kind of about drag kings, and it was about like female-bodied people, which is generally like the accepted definition of what a drag king is like a female-bodied person coming on stage and performing as a man. And so we sort of encouraged like, women and dykes and, queer people or whatever who were in the space to kind of like, claim this like masculinity that for so many of us had just been like always denied. And, this on the bottom right was halftime. Sorry, maybe I can do that for you folks. Can you still see me? Is that okay? You have to see me. I won't talk if you can't see me. And yeah, so this is like a halftime game of arm wrestling, which we did for the first like few years. And so this is a little bit of history. 2008 Man Up. Blank slide. You're welcome. Okay, I'm like far from the authority on like historical drag or whatever, but I thought Wikipedia can help, and we can all learn together. Probably many of you know more than I do about sort of the very beginnings of drag, but this is like a few sort of beautiful found photos that are interesting in this kind of context of talking about Vancouver's sort of recent history in queer performance. So drag dates back to like the 1800s. It was first sort of like socially accepted as a like theatrical device. It was like for a very long time it was far more socially acceptable for men to play women's roles than it was for women to have any roles at all. And so, but you could still be arrested for being in drag or like cross-dressing in public for many years after the first sort of like historical documentation of drag in theater. On the top left is one of the earliest known or recorded drag kings named Vesta Tilly. That photo is from 1910, or in the 1910s. In the 1920s, this at the top right is like an old drag ball, so the quality is not very good. Like one of the early drag balls, which is like a space where mostly like men would go and just like wear these like wildly elaborate over-the-top outfits and sort of like claim this power and fabulousness that for like queer people or gay men and like lower class people was like so fantastically out of reach. And it was this like space of, you know, owning this fantasy and living it out and being celebrated and fabulous like in front of your community. And then on the bottom right is a drag queen being arrested and not bothered at all, really. Thank you. And then this one even gets her own text underneath the only slide with text. This is Stormy DeLarvery, who is probably the most famous sort of early drag king. Yeah, so anyway, flashback Friday. Okay, so getting back to a little bit to Man Up and sort of my like process. I began as a drag king because at the time that I was sort of, it was so early in my exposure to queer community that I had like no language at all for you know, what gender was or who I was as like a gendered person. I had long since abandoned my aspirations of being called Mark, which happened around like age 5, and you know, I got my family together and said, call me Mark. And so drag for me in those sort of early times, like what was radical and subversive and exciting was portraying masculinity on stage. So for a long time, for the first few years of Man Up and of my like experience doing drag, that was sort of how I explored it. And over time, you know, I personally, in my own like mind, but also in the community and sort of socially, culturally, in the broader like mainstream, in the last 10 years, there has been quite a sort of opening understanding of gender as being non-binary and non-existing on this kind of like linear spectrum, you know, with two options, one or the other, but in fact being a sort of like vast multi-dimensional sort of like concept, and people, excuse me, can identify their genders outside of this like line, if you will, like polar binary. Anyway, so as I progress, and we'll see like more interesting photos than just me of like our other performers who are sort of exploring this sort of like feminine, masculine, sort of complicated, like ambiguous expression of gender and drag. So yeah, I guess the way that for me, and I think from, you know, working with like probably at this point hundreds, but for sure, at least dozens of like kind of like core Man Up people over the years, has been sort of their experience too. That when I came into gender performance as like a concept, part of what had me, you know, understand that gender was not just this like linear binary construct idea, was in practicing like being manly, and so, you know, much like an actor might, I suppose, as I was like early in my drag life, you know, deconstructing how to like stand like a man, or like walk like a man, or like hold the microphone like a man, or like talk and like emote in a masculine way. It was this sort of strange and like drawn out, it was like a year's, you know, many years of process, this like paradoxical kind of like discovery of like, at first, discovering that that was sort of more my essence than the femininity that had been like ascribed to me because of the body that I was born into. And so then that sort of posed the question, like, what is drag then, if I'm no longer identifying with femininity as like my gender, but now I'm identifying with masculinity as my gender? So then if we're defining drag as like performing the opposite gender, how does that work, and what does that now look like? And then I was also kind of like discovering at the same time that like those set of like actions and like, you know, things and signifiers and behaviors that we associate culturally in this culture, in this time and place, like with masculinity, are like not fixed, and they're not essential, and they're just this, you know, it's just this like social agreement that we have that this is what this means. And then it's a further complicating layer to, you know, think about the bodies in our society that are enabled to be that way. So yeah, so I guess I don't know, I'm hoping the talkback will help me to clarify any of this that have seemed a bit rambling. Like I said, usually I'm up here lip syncing and not like talking. So yeah, as like Man Up sort of grew, there seemed to be also this like cultural sort of discourse emerging, and it certainly isn't like as new as the last 10 years, but to my understanding, it's sort of only kind of in that time been like with the rise of RuPaul's Drag Race and trans icons in media and stuff like that, is now becoming a little bit more normalized discourse talking about like alternative gender identities. And through Man Up's kind of journey as an event, we have seen a sort of like evolution of what gender performance means for our show, and I think more broadly in the Vancouver queer performance community as well. So folks like Rose Butch, who is pictured on the bottom left, taking a bite out of the patriarchy, and also on the bottom right, sort of came on the scene around 3 years ago with a term that none of us have found like anywhere else. And maybe it exists, but as far as we know, like they started using it of their own like mind, of a drag thing. And so they were sort of like proudly, right from the inception of their like character, sort of saying like, I identify as non-binary in life. I'm like somewhere in the middle or outside of this like linear spectrum of gender. And similarly, the drag that I'm interested in like exploring and portraying is like a gender kind of mishmash, and you can't put a finger exactly on what I'm doing. And so this is some of the like cool sort of like evolution of like gender performance that we've been seeing in the last few years. Oh my god, I just knew everything that I was gonna say. Yeah, so some of the other sort of new characters that we were seeing emerge in drag shows and in queer communities here and elsewhere. I mean, I would say maybe cities like San Francisco have been seeing this for a very long time, but bearded queens and non-binary performers, faux queens, so people who identify as women but are performing as drag queens, trans performers who in some cases don't use the label drag performance artists sometimes, and we've really tried to kind of like nurture this like expansion of all the possibilities and ways that that you can perform gender. So these are just some kind of like snapshots to kind of like further illustrate like some of the sort of like things that that we like explore and showcase in the show. This performer, Tony McShane on the left, is you know, performing as a drag king, but you know, the most kind of subversive and like radical thing that they could, you know, do, you know, and as their kind of like drag progressed, was to actually show their like, you know, their breasts and their body. As somebody who you know, has been, and I feel like I could speak to my own experience anyway, you know, who's sort of like denied body in this confused, like, this isn't right for me, femininity is like not me, and then sort of coming almost full circle and being able to like use what you have in this like sort of playful way that you're presenting as a man, and then revealing this like feminine body, and it's just like further trying to like undermine the notions of like gender and what that means, and how we're allowed to move and entertain. This is Owen and Poppy J doing another kind. This is sort of moving into talking about the role that that gender performance and queer performance spaces play for queer communities. So these folks were doing a tribute to the Orlando shooting. They're both Latino drag kings, and so it's a lot of like silliness and fun and games, and sometimes it gets like pretty heavy because we recognize that we're still existing in political space and sort of fighting for the right to be in like the ways that we are. Rose and Grimm on the right, known for some like extraordinary like makeup skills, and Vixen Von Flex on the left, known for some amazing like contortion. So people are bringing kind of all different kinds of talents. We did an impersonations show once, so Carmela Barr as Tina Turner, Ruby Slicker as Amy Winehouse. I did Taylor Swift and Jaylee Time, who is like a local icon, makeup artist, like celebrity in Vancouver, as Mariah Carey. Yeah, just having a great time, doing what we do. And I don't know if I have any time. I was afraid that I wouldn't say enough and that I would need to fill time, so I like have a video after this. We can totally just like chit chat instead and do a Q&A. This is my last slide. That's the end.
You're so tall. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.
I think that conversation is really interesting around this idea of identity in general, and something that really stands out to me in drag is not only synthesizing the essence of your own identity, but then also this idea that it's a performance and character. And so I'm curious as to when you are in drag and you are Pony Boy, do you feel that that is reflecting more your essence and identity, or do you still feel like there's a character there, or do you play with it and portray different versions in different performances?
I had meant to touch on that, and I didn't, so thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
You're a great host. So, yeah, I would say that, like, it's a constantly evolving process. Like, early in my drag, it was through drag that I, like, you know, discovered my like true, or at least like present gender identity, and then my drag changed because the drag that I was doing was just me on stage, like being me and being masculine with like the mustache that I wish I could grow, you know what I mean? So then, you know, when I came to like, sorry for just like talking about me, I'm just like, I can't talk about, I don't know, other people's experience. So I just, my experience was that then my drag it had to kind of take another couple steps and find new characters that were different than me. And I would often find that as I played characters, I was like accessing some kind of corner of my personality or like identity, and sometimes it would not go any further than the performance really, and sometimes it would become like a full-on journey of like self-exploration and like discovery that fundamentally like changed how I think about myself and like operate like in the world. So that's a long way of saying neither here nor there.
Thank you for synthesizing it for me at the end. English is not my strong point. I could monopolize you for hours, so I'm going to turn this over to the audience. Do we have any questions for Paige?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Emmy. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is this parallel evolution of understanding gender. So for example, we went from like the L word to Orange is the New Black. But we've also gone and seen a parallel evolution in the kink community, from like really sketchy coke-fueled dens in New York City to 50 Shades of Grey or Black or whatever it is. Yeah. So, like, in what ways do you think the kink community has influenced drag in queer community and vice versa within that process?
Can you repeat that question? Yeah, totally. Thank you. So we've seen sort of a growth or evolution of the like kink scene as being this like super underground like coke den New York City sort of like undercurrent culture to 50 Shades of Grey being a relatively like mainstream accessible sort of like narrative of like kink culture, and similarly we've gone from like the L word, which was a very kind of like normative gender sort of like whitewashed upper class like sort of story to Orange is the New Black, which is like a narrative of queerness that is sort of like more actually I don't know how to finish that sentence, but how has the kink community influenced drag and drag culture and vice versa? Yeah? Okay. So I don't have a whole lot of experience in the kink scene. There's definitely overlaps in the queer and drag scene. I think that I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to say on that, except that I think like consent politics and like consent culture is like at least trying and has to some degree successfully, like in certain communities, become more of a language that people understand and a part of like queer culture and kink culture. I think that, you know, as with like this story of how gentrification happens, like the underground like poor artists and like are what are bringing sort of like interesting like, you know, visibility and like insight into communities that have otherwise been like, you know, marginalized and silenced and invisible. And that's interesting, and that makes for good storytelling. And so we're just maybe seeing a sort of like increase in visibility of that, and simultaneously like a co-opting of those like identities and stories into a palatable kind of like narrative for a broader audience, but that is still kind of like edgy, you know? I don't know, that's what comes to mind in response to that question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Over there. Glasses, I think?
Is there another question for Paige?
Hi.
So, although your entire talk has a lot to do with gender and sexuality, I felt a very strong resonance with your entire story and how you feel and how you perceive your reality as a female engineer who has gone through the process of becoming an engineer. And while this aspect has nothing to do with sexuality, I felt a strong correlation with your experiences with trying and doing whatever you can to act the part of the man in order to feel something that would relate to sort of success or through like just feeling good about yourself. So while my experience has nothing to do with sexuality and has nothing to do with gender per se, I wonder how much you perceive your desire to embody the masculinity of the world, how well you, or how strongly you think that you're trying to embody that, simply because society has told us that that is the thing that will make you a strong person. So I'm curious about the relation that I have with being an engineer in a male-dominated profession, and you, like, your pursuit is in the arts profession, and in just being something other than what your biology said you're supposed to be. Whether or not that is influenced by the fact that society says that being a man is better and stronger and just more empowering. So I'm just curious what you think about those societal programmings that exist, and whether or not maybe you've been influenced by that, or whether or not it's something completely aside from that.
Thanks for that question. Does anyone in the back need that repeated or like summarized? Yeah, you project. Yeah? Yeah, okay. Come on. Okay, so maybe like has my personal exploration of like masculinity and like discovering masculinity as being something sort of like within me as part of my true self, is that potentially, has it been influenced by a society that has shown me and shows all of us that, you know, masculinity is, you know, the way to succeed or get ahead or whatever? That's a very like interesting question, and has been sort of, you know, a few years into like these conversations and the culture and the community, and thinking about like myself and society, something that I began to think about too. And I have not yet answered this question. I think that absolutely that has been a part of my socialization, and I wonder, so I should say, like, when I use the term trans to describe myself, it is a contemporary definition of trans that it understands that is like between rather than opposite. So like we used to understand the term trans as being like, I was born into the wrong body, and like, you know, and that is still an identity that like people, of course, like have, and is the experience and reality for a lot of people to this day. And there are a lot of other people who sort of exist somewhere in the middle, and when they say trans, they mean like, you know, in between. So so that's sort of the trans that like I identify with, and I definitely have wondered and talked at like with folks in the community about you know, the degree to which queer women and you know, women in society are programmed to like you know, envy or aspire to, you know, behaviors and ways of being. And I mean, in a patriarchal society, like, you know, capitalism and the rest of it is kind of like set up to favor traits that are, you know, traditionally held by men. So I think that that's a very real thing, and it has been a sort of like ongoing journey of like food for thought for myself, like to what degree is this like a real true part of me, and to what degree is just like the notion of masculinity and femininity and gender totally socialized and totally just like this conversation we're having, but not actually anything that exists in the material world that we can fully, totally like define. And certainly isn't fixed across time and space. I mean, gender roles and gender traits have been changing across cultures and time, of course, through history. So I hope that kind of answers your question. In short, yes, you're right. Yes. Yes. Good question.
I think we'll end questions there, but I'm sure Paige would be happy to talk with you during the break. I'm saying that for you.
Yeah, no, I
actually didn't ask for your consent. May I have consent? Thank you. A big round of applause for Paige, please. And I believe we have a couple tickets to give away to Man Up. We do? Yeah, I think we have them up here. Please tweet at us at NerdNightYVR what your drag name would be, and Paige will pick their favorite, okay? At NerdNightYVR, what's your drag name? We're gonna take a 10-minute break, go get yourself a drink.
Let's give it up for DJ Burgers, give us some sweet tunes. AKA Grant Miner, former Nerd Night speaker, everyday nerd. ever at Triumph, being a cool engineer. But we've got some wieners. We got some wieners giving away 2 tickets to Man Up. Why don't you describe what's going on here?
Easily confused as my flashcards for my presentation, but in fact have a special sticker on the back that makes them a ticket to the show. So the winners, thanks everyone for your submissions. Mr. Gin Atomic.
Rochelle Potter, to put that one in. Where's Rochelle? Rochelle's back there, so she gets. Did you have 2 sets or just
yes,
one?
Yes.
Because we also have another prize as well.
I have 2, but let's make them each a +1. How's that?
Okay.
So each one is worth 2. How's
Let's
that?
give away 3 too then.
Okay.
We also have a $25 gift card to Dublin Gate, which I would highly recommend that you go in drag because it's like a really traditional Irish pub. So I think like if you do get the gift card, you have to go in drag. That's like the stipulation. So our second winner is
Karen from HR.
yes, Karen from HR. Liz Otero. Where's Liz? Liz back there. Right on. Did you have? I'll
Pick the third.
I'll pick the third
Yeah.
one. I like this one. Justin's Beaver. Russ Potter. Where's Russ? There he is. There's Russ. Awesome. Let's give him a big round of applause for 3 winners. And because we love all of our speakers so much, we got wine to give away so that they can all get drunk and think about it. We forgot to give one away to Jared because we love our speakers, which is a good segue. Like if you guys want to be up here, if you're a nerd and have something to say, come find me here in Canada. Send us an email, send us a tweet, Facebook, Instagram, anything you want. Your social media pick, Snapchat us if you want, which is go nowhere if you don't have Snapchat. But
I do. You can Snapchat me.
Snapchat Paige, she'll get a hold of us because we got lots of fun nights ahead of us, and we'd love to hear from you. So. You have one more thing.
I just wanted to quickly provide some friendly information, aka shameless plug, about our drag show this week. It's actually the 9th anniversary Man Up show this Friday in 2 days, which is crazy and such an exciting new chapter. So if you want to ever come to the show, it's at the Cobalt on the last Friday of the month. And for special shows like Pride and New Year's Eve and our anniversary shows in March, we do advanced tickets, but there's always tickets available at the door too. So yeah, if you're interested, Man Up Vancouver on Facebook and on Instagram, and we'd love to have you out for a show anytime. Thanks.
Yay.
Oh, thank you.